Now, some people listening might think that this whole argument is a pile of crap about peak oil, that if it was true that we'd know more about it, because let's face it, this is not a topic that's dominated discussion lately. Well, let's put it under some scientific scrutiny. Dr. Karl was in at Triple J today, and I asked him if there was science behind these arguments about oil supplies peaking at around about now.
It seems as though we're on the peak. Maybe we reached a few years ago, maybe we'll reach in a few years. We're pretty well halfway through the easily available oil. By easily available, easy, you drill a hole in the ground or the ocean, comes out under pressure. Good quality oil, no sulphur. Yeah, look, you can make oil out of garbage, but it's just getting incredibly expensive. We're halfway through the easily available high quality oil, yes.
What are your main concerns about this?
There's nothing left for our children. I love oil. Oil has fantastic chemicals in it, and they can make all sorts of plastics, Kevlar, synthetics, good sort of building materials for the future.
All that sorbeline you smear on your body, has that got oil in it?
Yes, it comes from it. And yet, what we do with it is we get these fantastically complicated long-chain molecules that nature has made, and we break them down into a bunch of carbon molecules between 6 and 15 long, and we burn them. And we leave nothing for our children. Oil as a raw material for plastics for the future, yes. For burning and using as a fuel, no. It's just fuelish. I mean, fuelish. think about how much you need. If you fill up your car's fuel tank with 70 litres of fuel, where did it come from? Well, it came from 1,600 kilograms of plants. That's 1.6 tonnes of plants that covered over 1 square kilometre of land and took about 100 million years. Each time you fill up your tank, you're using those resources. You are using up buried sunshine. It's a wicked thing to do.
So what are the alternative energy sources that we should be pursuing now?
For mobile transportation, you need some sort of liquid. And I like fuel cell technology. A fuel cell is like a battery that never runs dry, so long as you keep on giving it the fuel. So it gives electricity, so you have electric motors in your car, and the fuel is hydrogen, and the way to get it is from solar cells. You have a whole bunch of solar cells. A bunch of solar cells covering 40 kilometres by 40 kilometres would provide all of our energy needs for Australia. It doesn't work at night, of course, so you need a worldwide grid. So you use the electricity to break water into hydrogen and oxygen, use the hydrogen in the cars.
James Howard Kunstler, the author of The Long Emergency, says the alternative sources like, say, for example, solar and wind, he says as well, rely on other energy like oil to make the components, and that may not be a solution.
That's right. You need energy to make energy, and it is expensive, but it's taking us away from the evil greenhouse gas thing, and basically it's the only pathway we can go down. And we can get the making of solar cells much more efficient in the future.
Another option seems to be nuclear power. Now, people hate hearing the word nuclear used. Is it an option?
Yes. People worry that there will be nuclear stuff coming out of a nuclear power reactor. Well, cop this. Each coal-fired power plant that burns up about 4 million tonnes of coal per year puts out 4 tonnes of uranium and 16 tonnes of highly radioactive thorium into the environment. It goes somewhere, we don't know where. So already coal-fired power plants are throwing lots of nuclear debris into the environment. It is possible to get rid of the waste from a nuclear reactor, but it's expensive. You drill a hole 1 kilometre into the ground. When you get to the bottom, that's really expensive. You put out spokes in all directions and put the nuclear waste up those little tunnels and cover it with 20 metres of concrete and come up and do the same thing again. It's much cheaper to put the nuclear waste into an iron drum, and when it rusts after 20 years, after you've left on the side of a river, say, gee, how come it rusted? I never knew that iron rusted. It is possible to get rid of the waste. It's expensive.
Dr. Karl giving us his take on peak oil. He believes there's a lot of science behind it. Sonia Shah, Karl mentioned there's some options for alternative sources of energy other than oil. What do you think is the best option?
Well, the one thing that he didn't mention is, which he may have just forgotten to mention, is conservation, which is the other sort of big way to use an alternative energy, which is just using less stuff, using less energy overall, which will save us so much more trouble in the long run. So all of his alternatives, solar, wind, all the renewable energies, like you said, the return on energy invested is much less. So say for oil, you invest 1 unit of energy into drilling a hole in the ground, you get 100 times more energy back out of the oil that you get out of the ground. Well, for solar, it's something like 4 to 1. Maybe we can get it to 10 to 1 with better technology, but it's still not going to give us anywhere near the surplus that fossil fuels give us. So that means ultimately we have to contract in some way.
Alex Wadsley has worked as an analyst in the oil industry, and he's currently doing a PhD in economics at the University of Tasmania. Alex, what worries you about the oil supplies of the world peaking?
Well, I think the fundamental question is going to be how do economies adapt? I sort of don't agree with the concept that we're going to be in a continuous contraction. I think we've faced disasters relating to energy supplies in the past. I think back in the 19th century, or the end of the 19th century, they thought that London was going to come to a standstill because it was going to fill up with horse manure. They found the motor car, what was then a very clean source of energy, and they motored along for another 100 years based on that. I think in terms of where the shocks will come, as if, I guess, in terms of the resources that are there, particularly like Saudi Arabia, in terms of what its reserves are. If you get a big shock happening in terms of the Ghawar field stops pumping, that supplies 6% of the world's oil. If it stops pumping, there is going to be a massive oil price shock. The price will have to go up until people stop driving. So the question is going to be, at what pace does sort of conventional oil be replaced by non-conventional oil? At what place do those efficient technologies come in place? I mean, I don't quite see the hydrogen fuel option that Karl was looking at. I see hydrogen as just being another form of battery. I think we've actually got effective technology now to take us down the conservation efficiency route in terms of hybrids. I think if we can get enough hybrids on the roads and people buy them, use them, and then soon plug them into the power grid, you'll actually have a transition path which avoids a lot of the catastrophes that people are talking about. But it's a question of government showing leadership to actually get the technology that's available now into operation, rather than talking about technology which might be available in the future. And I think if we do that, then we can manage through, but oil prices will rise.
Now, Alex, how sure can we be about this idea about peak oil? Now, we know people lie about their oil reserves. We know that sometimes you can't predict what we might find. How do we know that this is the case?
Well, I guess you can't know, and in terms of I think Hubbart's original prediction, I think he originally predicted 1956 or so, and every 20 years or so somebody's done a re-estimate. I say his fundamental theory is right. That is, there will be a peak at some point, but the question about what sort of peak are we talking about? Are we talking about a peak from which we can't produce any more oil, or are we talking about a peak from which the price has to keep on increasing, and then we've got options of moving on to non-conventional resources? And the question about how much we're going to pay for those non-conventional resources, and what sort of carbon emissions are people going to be willing to accept in order to get their oil. So it's going to be this. We don't necessarily face a peak in the short or medium term if we're willing to burn lots of tar sands and make the greenhouse effect much worse. If we want to protect the environment, then efficiency is the route, and then we'll probably see some form of peak in the next sort of 10 to 20 years. But that's assuming we don't have a massive discovery somewhere, which is possible but unlikely.
Kylie's given us a call. Kylie works at a servo. Hi, Kylie.
Kimberly.
Kimberly. Sorry, Kimberly.
You're right.
Tell what point did you want to make?
Well, I just sort of want to say that I think the petrol price is far, far too cheap. I mean, there's no incentive for people not to drive their cars, especially in Australia. I think it's one of the top cheapest sort of places to get petrol. And, it's cheaper than bottled water. It's quite ridiculous.
Alex or Sonia, do you want to make a comment about that?
Yeah, I'd like to say something about that. I mean, I think that's true as someone who comes from the States originally, that we are very protected from the true cost of oil. If we could respond appropriately to price signals, then we might use it as the precious natural resource that it really is. We wouldn't just be burning it. As Dr. Karl mentioned, these precious hydrocarbons are very unique organic molecules that we can use for so many different things. But we are protected from it, and that's kind of the problem.